what should I be thinking and listening and trying to hear when I'm in the boardroom when we're talking about this specific issue? And also, what's the red flag? What are the red flags if I do hear from management? I want to pause and sort of say I need to dig a little bit deeper because I'm not hearing what I need to hear.
That's a really good question, Stephen. What about the questions? What should you be asking? Well, what you want to see is that leadership is approaching the flexible future of work in 3 phases. There's what's happening now, obviously, what's going to happen in the near future, and what's going to happen next in the digitally enabled, flexible way of operating that's going to be the reality post-pandemic. So you want to start first by asking, how are they optimizing the way people are working right now? We are still in the teeth of the pandemic. It looks like it's going to be a few months before people are going to be vaccinated, and maybe we can begin to transition back safely into a workplace. So how do you ensure the mental, the emotional, and the physical well-being of a workforce that's really been through a lot already over the past year? But at the same time, you also want to be asking them, are you trying to determine how people expect to work once it is safe to transition back on site? What is next? You want to be studying that right now. So your red flag really is going to be if they say to you, well, we have our back to the workspace plan. That's not going to get you there. You want to hear that they're surveying, they're focus grouping people, and they're trying to understand what will most likely be the hybrid on-site remote work reality people are going to expect. What the studies are showing over and over again, and what we're seeing in the internal research we're doing for our clients, is that on average, people expect to be able to flexibly work 2 to 3 days a week on site and 2 to 3 days a week remotely. So again, how are your leaders getting a sense of what that looks like? And then the third question is, what are they doing over the next 6 to 9 months to prepare the organization to execute that new digitally enabled, flexible way of operating across place, space, and time? Because remember, it's not just remote work. So what you want to hear is that response is a strategic, coordinated approach. It's not just a whole bunch of tactics that are happening. So if you hear, well, we're reviewing our remote work policy, that's a red flag, because that is not going to get you to that new reality that people are saying they expect and what you ultimately want. So what you want to hear and what you want to be asking about are 3 levels of execution. First, obviously, is the infrastructure. So things like, how are we adapting our workspaces? What are we doing with that? If you have the CFO come in and say, we're just getting rid of all of our workspace, that's a red flag, because people are saying they want to be 2 to 3 days on site. So, that really is a reconfiguration of workspace. Workplaces, what does that look like? And you want to look at technology, obviously, but technology is not flexibility. Technology is an enabler. And you want to make sure the right infrastructure for technology is in place for sure, but make sure it's really necessary in supporting the work. And also, you and I have talked about this, Stephen, the process flexibility. So what do you want to keep from what you've learned during this forced experiment? Boards are doing it themselves, right? You're thinking about, when we're able to get together again, do we want to still keep some aspects of this remote interchange that we have over Zoom? But then what do we want to try to accomplish when we are together? So that infrastructure piece is really important, but don't stop there. If that's where your leadership stops, again, that's a red flag, because they also want to make sure that they're building the culture that can really allow people to succeed and execute and leverage that infrastructure to achieve the goals of the organization. And that is a culture of shared leadership, where managers have the skills and tools, but also individuals do as well, so they can partner in this new way of operating. And finally, the ecosystem of the entire enterprise needs to be reviewed and make sure it's aligned around this new way of working. So that includes your IT strategy, your facilities strategy, and your HR strategy, because you may need a new performance management system, you may need new competencies that you're trying to develop, and then finally, leadership. You really want to make sure that your leadership understands this is a new day. I have to be very frank and honest. I'm still shocked at the number of leaders I meet in organizations, even right now, after all we've been through, who I think are still under the assumption that we're going back to the way things were. And we're not. So, again, it's just making sure all three of levels, that's how they're approaching this next phase of how we're going to operate.